Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Darren.
Hello.
After conquering the underground with 3 bona fide classics, as well as several amazing EPs, Modest Mouse finally broke into the mainstream with their 4th studio album, Good News for People Who Love Bad News, from 2004, mostly on the strength of lead single and unlikely top 40 hit, Float On. Underground artists had obviously crossed over before, but to people our age, it was genuinely bizarre to hear such titans of indie on the radio, and in retrospect, this was a major turning point in the development of indie rock, which would soon be absolutely everywhere. As such, Modest Mouse was one of the first bands from this generation of indie to face accusations of, quote, selling out. And this album, and especially Float On, have had a pretty complicated legacy ever since, even though the idea of selling out has all but vanished in the last few years. So we've decided it's high time to reassess Good News, discuss its place in the band's career, and maybe rethink the idea of selling out altogether. Before we get into it, I want to set the scene a little bit. Good News wasn't released until April 6th, but Float On dropped on February 14th, 2004, and on that date, the number 1 song in the country was The Way You Move by Outkast. Remember that one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Great song. The number 1 movie was Barbershop 2, Back in Business. I'm sure we all remember that one.
I loved the first Barbershop when I was a kid, to be completely honest.
Well, George W. Bush obviously was president, and we were about 1 year into the Iraq War. So what are your guys' memories of that time, 2004 rather? Do you remember Float On coming out? And what are your kind of personal histories with this album?
I guess in 2004, I would have been in like
10th grade.
Or 10th grade. Yeah, 10th grade.
We were in 9th grade, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember like Float On being big on the radio, but like honestly, I wasn't super into Modest Mouse or anything yet, so it was sort of my first experience. I remember thinking it was like, a bit of a banger, and I bought the record when it came out and stuff, and then I got into Modest Mouse like on the back of that.
Well, for me, I have very vivid memories of PE class. In 9th grade, I was very much into like Nirvana at the time. I was definitely like that headphone wearing kid who, was just keeping to himself or whatever, listening to music. But there were kids talking about Modest Mouse. One person in particular who was like sort of calling them out as being sellouts. It's so weird because it felt like all of what we now talk about is like emo and society, all the things that were culturally happening were all happening in this like microcosm in this little like 9th grade PE class. And
it's true.
And he was just going on and on about it. I didn't know anything about Modest Mouse really at all. And of course I started to hear about Float On, and I actually think I probably saw the music video, if I recall, because that was still a time where like music videos were still watchable, I guess. And I think I liked it, but I just never really got into it, so I wasn't really on either side of the sellout argument for a while. And I later on did become a fairly big fan of Modest Mouse. I did like this record, and of course I ended up loving The Moon in Antarctica much more, and then we'll talk about kind of what happens after Good News. But
I mean, for me, this was like a really personal album. It was like, I had this sort of a weird trajectory where I was buying CDs when I was young, and then I discovered like file sharing and was fully into that, and basically got into Modest Mouse like on a song by song basis in that way. Probably downloaded a couple songs that weren't actually Modest Mouse without knowing it, and then at some point around the time I entered high school, my mom had read too many reports about how evil file sharing was, so she, refused to let me use it anymore. So I switched back to CDs. And I feel like one of the first CDs I bought was this album, Good News. And so it was like a big deal for me because it was like the first time in a while that I was just listening to one album over and over again. And I grew like very, very attached to it. In my memory, I don't know how this can be right, but it wasn't until like later that everybody was talking about Float On or something. I guess, sometimes like singles come out and they take a while to gather steam, but I remember feeling like, why is everybody suddenly talking about this old song, But I from then, from there I went into like fully purchasing all of their albums and everything, became like a massive fan. But it almost feels like this, even though I liked Modest Mouse a lot, this was like the album that made me love Modest Mouse. And they were truly my favorite band for a period there. Was this album, like one of your favorites back then? Or was it kind of like how did you feel about it?
I mean, I got into them from this album, like I said. So, I mean, at that time, it was obviously my favorite of theirs. But I think as soon as I got like into This Is a Long Drive, that like instantly became my favorite, and I think probably still is to this day of theirs. This one was never like I always like really enjoyed it, but really like from This Is a Long Drive to Good News, sort of was just like a perfect discography at that age for me and stuff. It was like at any moment maybe one of those could be my favorite, sort of just the one I was into at that time. But yeah, I think This Is a Long Drive was always my actual favorite.
Yeah, I think I recall loving this album and listening to it quite a bit. I cannot remember whether I owned the CD or not. I feel like I did, and I felt like I spent a lot of time with this record alone before actually venturing back into like the rest of their catalog. But it just had this, and kind of looking at it from afar now, it has this sort of like moment in time kind of history, you know what I mean, where it's always going to remind me of this particular time of my life, you know what I mean? And so it's hard for me to like listen to it and remember specifically why I liked it, other than just like kind of thinking about what was I doing at the time, what other music was I listening to, you know what I mean? Like,
no, I'm glad you said that. I was thinking like because I hadn't listened to this record in God knows how long, and I was listening to it, I was like, is this what people like our parents feel like when they hear the Rolling Stones, or so, like, because like it was the same way, I was thinking like, oh fuck, I remember like in high school this was like we were always riding around listening to this record, it was like it had that like sort of, I like really felt like this is what boomers must feel like.
yeah
well, is this what the Nirvana people who were there when Smells Like Teen Spirit blew up, is this we're ninth graders in 1991 thinking the same thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I want to return to all this reflection, but first I want to do like a proper re-review of this album. I want to start as usual by trying to describe the sound of this record. I mean, overall, how would you describe what this record sounds like?
I mean, it's hard to like. This is what like early 2000s like indie rock sort of sounded like. It's got like still sort of like a I don't want to say amateur because that implies like a badness or something, but like a garage feel, like almost something you could have made at home. But obviously, like they're on a major label by this point, and so there's like some money behind it. So there's like there's a sheen around it, but it's still it's not like it doesn't sound like U2 or something, something like that polished. And then
I'm kind of surprised that you would say that, honestly, because I think of it as like a sudden, like just sounding like this huge jump forward in musicianship, like as if they hired like Nashville's best studio musicians to play like stand-up bass and the violin and the cellos and everything. It's got like almost like a very traditional arrangements, and to me it sounds almost like I can't believe this is the kind of amateur punky band that they used to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they like extended the lineup to 5 people for this record, and there's the Dirty Dozen brass band like plays horns on Devil's Work Day and stuff. But I mean, I feel like I never felt like it's like, oh, now they're the best musicians ever where they weren't before. Like, I mean, it's obviously like a bit of a jump forward, but I don't think it's like that huge of a sonic leap from Moon in Antarctica or anything.
I mean, I just would never use amateur to describe this. What do you think about that, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they are, the kind of garage band that like grows up and gets very sophisticated in their sound, like it's like very obvious when they're using like effects, you know what I mean? So like that to me is like a garage band kind of vibe when like the opening of like Ocean Breathe Salty, you know what I mean? That the way the guitar is affected, it's like a single effect pedal affecting
exactly.
it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to me that has the sound of like a garage band, but then they sort of expand on that sound by, you know, I think creating, you know, adding more layers and everything, but still feeling very much like a, you know, a rock band or an indie rock band. But I get what you're saying, Gabe. Like it's, you know, it's a step above, you know, I don't know, maybe like, go ahead.
Even Moon in Antarctica, I think, is like more like roughshod, and it just sounds like, you know, it sounds like a band that's been let into a major label studio for the first time and is a little bit like, damn, that effect sounds cool, or like we've never had access to that before. And they're like doing a lot of cool shit like that. And, you know, this one, when I hear like the, you know, the world at large you mentioned, like by the end, there's like lush strings and timpani up in that bitch. Like, you know, at the end of Blame It on the Titans, there's like just this absolutely elegant like little piano solo. The cello is like kind of, you know, it's just,
I mean, that's what I was saying though. Like they sound like I think Darren is understanding me more. Like it you know, it is this like garage band like at heart, but they've got the backing. Yeah, they've got this backing now. So like, yeah, they can put you know, there's probably a timpani in the studio, and I'm sure, you know, whoever played it, like, you know, figured it out or whatever. You know, it's not like they got in a special timpani guy.
I feel like they did, and I feel like...
Well, they didn't. I'm looking at the personnel right now.
It sounds like they did to me, and it's like, I just contrast, like, Blame It on the Titans with Jesus Christ Was an Only Child from Lonesome Crowded West, where that sounds like they knew somebody who could play fiddle, you know? Whereas the violin solo on Blame It on the Titans sounds like absolutely professional. But I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
But do you at least... would you at least say, like... there's very polished on this record as opposed to basically everything that came before it?
Yeah, I think the production is so polished, and the, you know, just instrumentation is like traditional in a way that I don't like, they have never been, I think, because every song is kind of just, you know, it's just like a bass, drum, you know, guitar. It's like the, you know, the piano is played like a piano, you know, it's just never like really, it's just sort of sounds like a professional outfit or something. You know, not that that's a bad thing. I'm always shocked at like how clean and you know, just professional this sounds. But in continuing to describe the sound, I have sort of a theory. We did this with the Neutral Milk Hotel record on Avery Island, but I feel like this album also sort of, maybe you'll disagree, works as like there are 3 song types on this album. So one is kind of like the, I don't know, like the jaunty, like indie dance disco thing that you hear on Float On. You know, there's a lot of like really funky kind of slinky bass lines and stuff with kind of the, you know, the high, like Nile Rodgers kind of guitars and stuff. There's a couple of those like Float On or like The View or even One Chance at points. And then you've got like these kind of somber, almost like country-ish songs with like the stand-up bass and everything, and like the acoustic guitars, you know, like Bukowski or Blame It on the Titans, The Good Times Are Killing Me. Then you've got like the Tom Waits Junkyard songs where he's like screaming his head off, and those are kind of peppered in for good measure, like Dance Hall, Bury Me With It. You know, Satin in a Coffin is kind of like that. The Devil's Workday, obviously. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely like a valid point. Yeah, like there's definitely like this sort of 3 different categories that you could easily, you know, put all these in. Yeah, I agree with it.
But they almost feel like they're written in that vein. Like, all right, this is kind of the direction we're going in for this song. It's going to fit this template or this kind of formatting. And I don't know, Gabe, if you're kind of hinting at like that being a sort of a negative, because when you go back to like the Moon in Antarctica, even though, you know, the sound is recognizable, it's not like they just completely shifted away. There's just something very different about the structure of those songs in that album, that it felt more organic. It felt more like, let's just take a chance and, you know, not have like this really expensive producer come in and say, no guys, we should just tame it here, we should dial it back there and just stick to like, achieving whatever theme, because like the songs on this record, some of them they're just the way you described. I'm thinking of some of the ones like Blame It on the Tetons, right? Like we want more emotion. Like, what can we do to pour more emotion into this song? You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to say that it's like not like disingenuous or whatever, but just disingenuous. Sorry, but something didn't
feels calculated.
Yeah. It sounds like somebody's giving some direction as to like. This is what you should go for if you want to make a hit or something,
I've seen people suggest this, that they feel like the label's hand in some of the decisions here. Yeah. I think it's equally possible that it's the band like making decisions about approachability and maybe being more accessible, which we can talk about later if that's a good or a bad thing. But I do think that the song structures are quite traditional as well as the arrangements here. And I was listening to Moon in Antarctica just before we were recording, actually, and I was, kind of like surprised to remember that basically no song is like verse, chorus, verse.
Right.
It's just they go in strange directions or do whatever the hell. Sometimes it's just the same thing the whole time. Sometimes it like, it changes radically over the course of the song. What do you think, Dan?
I just think it's a little. I don't think you can like fully compare it with Moon in Antarctica, because Moon in Antarctica is sort of the experimental record of theirs. I don't think it really sounds too much like Lonesome Crowd of West or This Is a Long Drive. As much as it sounds like Good News. It's just sort of like their quote unquote weird kind of record. But I do agree with like what you guys are saying. Like the categories and some other like sort of choices in this do feel a little calculated. Maybe they were, the label trying something. Maybe it was just the band trying to, make it cohesive, like sort of like Moon in Antarctica is, I think. And like all the little interludes and stuff, like horn intro. It's literally just like a copy and paste of the first 9 seconds of Devil's Workday. It's really unnecessary. That interlude, like Mellow, but
the label was like, we need an intro, guys. We need something for an intro.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the label or the band, just like that. That's the easy sort of way to make things like flow or whatever.
Feel a little more cohesive than it actually is when it's really just a batch of songs. You know. And maybe people just feel that like a disappointment about that because the last 2 Modest Mouse albums had such like lofty ambitions. Actually, the last 3 had such lofty ambitions in like a conceptual way. I do want to ask, I was going to ask later, but might as well get to it. What is up with the interludes? Because it's like basically the intro and Dig Your Grave sort of hint at the Devil's Workday. Right? Mm-hmm. Like it's the horns that's from that track, and then it's like the kind of whatever that twangy like ukulele sounding thing is. And it's like, why? I just don't really understand. It just sounds like a little tacked on, like you're saying, Dan, because what about the Devil's Workday makes it a necessary centerpiece of this album? You know what I mean? When you do that, hint at a song or reprise it, it makes you feel like, oh, this is the key to unlocking the whole
really
album.
Matters, right?
Like, honestly, I don't think that song really matters.
I could see it if it was like hinting towards Float On, and I think the world at large right before it, like sort of, it even says like, well, float on, it says the words float on and stuff. So like, yeah, I could see like that song is like clearly the single.
And I will say that Interlude it basically just plays like an intro to Blame It on the Tetons. It's kind of like the same instruments, like just kind of, sounding beautiful or whatever. But yeah, go on.
But yeah, like you're right. Like why do we have like so many sort of hints towards Devil's Workday, which is like a fun song and like it's great live and stuff, but like, is it the best song on this record? Is it like the most important song on this record?
Right.
No, I don't think so.
Like if Moon in Antarctica had like little hints of stars or projectors running throughout it, I would totally get that.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I see. Because it's like it's like really.
But if it had little hints of like Wild Pack of Family Dogs, you'd be like,
yeah, that would be really odd.
Like
right?
That's a cool song, but yeah, odd.
Yeah. Why are you doing that? Yeah, so I find that strange, and I do find that a little bit like, let's make this batch of songs more cohesive than they actually are. If we try to break it down a little bit, while we're on Devil's Workday, what do you guys make of those tracks that are like the wilder, more explosive Tom Waitsy, like, you know, Isaac Brock's classic, like just destroying his voice thing. You know, I was talking about how polished the production is, and I find them kind of like they're almost odd because Modest Mouse, something I love about their early work is that they can just like explode at any second. You know what I mean? And this sounds so like reined in. Maybe it's just how clean and polished the production is, but it's not like Bury Me With It explodes. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's like it's much more of like a controlled explode. You know, it's a calculated explosion. You sort of can feel the, you know, plays, you know, sort of thing. You can like sort of feel it coming. It's not like, you know, completely out of the blue or anything. So I do agree with you. I like those songs a lot. Like Satin in a Coffin is great. You know, it sort of does that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you know, Bury Me With It, Dance Hall, you know, like it's a little reined in, but again, like maybe, you know, if the band was trying to be like a little more accessible and stuff, like it is sort of like an accessible, like a noise rock kind of song,
yeah,
you know,
it could be, yeah,
kind of thing. So.
It feels like some of those songs are fighting against the production a little bit. And, you know, just as an anecdote, when the first time, actually only time I saw Modest Mouse perform, they played Dance Hall, which is a song I never liked, and it just fucking slapped.
Well,
like,
yeah.
it like
yeah.
tore the roof off the place. And it's like, now I like the song after having heard the live version because it sounds so weak and like, you know, flaccid on record. Do you agree with any of this, Darren?
Well, I mean, I feel like Dance Hall is one of those songs that's like deliberately designed with a crowd in mind. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
This is what the people are going to jump to this song and like, that's it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's great that you would think about a song like that. But to me, I feel like it's kind of one dimensional when that's the only, you know, the goal anyway. But, I mean, I agree with everything that you guys are saying. I feel like this is the work of, you know, and I'm not sure who produced this, Dan, you probably know, but it just sounds like somebody wanted to take the Modest Mouse sound from the previous 3 albums. And this is just part of the polishing effort, you know, like we still maintain Isaac, you know, with his screaming and those kind of songs and everything, but we tame it down, we package it nicely so that it can be easily consumed by the mainstream. I mean, we have to get into this at some point, but like, why was it this album that suddenly exploded, you know? And it wasn't just Float On, like people liked the other songs too, and there's a reason for that, you know?
I want to return to, I want to save most of that because I think there's a lot to dig into.
For sure.
But I mean, do you guys agree with me that when I think of this album, I think of a very mellow Modest Mouse, which is really weird when there are so many songs that are not mellow at all? Do you also feel that way?
Yeah, because I mean, you're right. I do feel that way. You know, if you ask me, I do feel that way. And I think it's because like it ends, or I mean, it starts like pretty mellow, and then it ends pretty mellow again. You know, all these sort of explosive songs are kind of packed in the middle, and I feel like you almost like forget. You know, I mean, Satin in a Coffin, sort of the last one of those like, you know, noisy kind of tracks, and then you've got 5 more, 4 if you don't count the interlude, like of just sort of like slow, you know, Blame It on the Tetons, Black Cadillacs, One Chance, Good Times to Come. Like all those songs sort of have the same like, you know, sort of feel to it, you know, probably like similar, you know, BPMs and stuff like, and I think like that, you know, kind of breaks it up for you and makes you feel like the overall mood was mellow. And I think like really there are just sort of more mellow songs like when it comes down to it as well. Yeah.
So in turning to the mellow songs, I think that I actually have to add a qualifier, which is that I sort of noticed in listening to this album a lot over the last 2 weeks that there's a little bit of a trick that they employ a lot here. And maybe it's actually spreads more into Modest Mouse's discography, and I just haven't thought about it. But a lot of the songs that are explosive, they like do this trick where the chorus is like very mellow. Or you think about like how somber the chorus of Float On actually is. It's the verse that's the hookiest part. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they, on almost every song, they like kind of do this like mellow out, which even when it's a little bit silly, like Bury Me With It or something, it just adds like this gravitas to the thing. It makes it feel like weightier. You know, not that it actually is, but just gives a necessary weight to it. But there are songs that are just fully mellow. You know, I mentioned like Blame It on the T-Ins. I mentioned Bukowski. World at Large is quite mellow. What do you guys make of these songs?
I mean, I like the mellow songs. I think that that's sort of like a thing that's kind of like that's the thing on this record that I think that feels like the most of a holdover from like Moon in Antarctica, because Moon in Antarctica is sort of like a calm, like
it has some very mellow, type songs.
It's sort of the least explosive up until that point, like of Modest Mouse, and so I think like those songs sort of like fit the direction they like pivoted to, but before this album.
And I want to add, like, if you listen to Modest Mouse has this very, back in these days, I was like, when I got into a song, I would learn it on the guitar. You know what I mean? You guys remember those days?
Guitar tabs, man.
Yeah. And Modest Mouse has like a very strange like chord thing that they do, and you hear it on like Blame It on the T-Ins, for example, but you hear it a lot on these more somber songs where like Blame It on the T-Ins sounds like Trailer Trash, that same like sort of intro, because those chords are like very distinctive the way he plays them. So it also feels like a little bit of a throwback, but like in panoramic widescreen with the nice production. What do you make of those songs, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned before, this album, I just can't disassociate my ninth grade or just whatever early high school self from this record. And so early high school involved a lot of just emotions, right? And just kind of growing up and teenage drama and all of that sort of stuff. So like these mellow songs to me still feel like they're the best songs or among the best songs on the record. Like that sort of Modest Mouse kind of always has represented like a lot of emotion and personal feelings and stuff, like from the Moon in Antarctica. And I feel like the moments on this record that kind of remind me of that are still among my favorite moments. And there's like a lot of just gorgeous moments on this record. I mean, I would kind of throw like Ocean Breathe Salty in the mellow category, even though it kind of varies a little bit, but it's such a gorgeous song. And I still consider it like one of the best on this record. But yeah, I mean, bottom line is like, I think that these mellow songs, the more kind of emotional songs, are the ones that I always like gravitate towards when it comes to this album. Yeah,
I think we could make a little detour and actually mention the lyrics a little bit here, which really resonated with me at like 14 years old or whatever, because he's just always like doing these kind of existential musings about like the universe and do people even matter and stuff like that. And especially like The World at Large, I just remember like just reading the lyrics like over and over again because I just thought they were so brilliant, like trying to emulate them with my own songs I was attempting to write at that time.
Live journal posts, I mean,
they
got perfect for that.
They're great like little one-liners. Listening now, I felt myself like cringing a couple times because he likes to do these things where it's like very deep and poetic, and it's sort of like a question about, do we matter or whatever. And then he'll always like undercut it with this kind of morbid cynicism, like, good thing we're all dead anyway, or something like that. Did you guys find yourselves like, how did you feel about the lyrics at age 30 or plus?
God, just the way you put that, that makes me feel awful.
As a 30 plus, I'll, I was worried about that because like I said, I hadn't listened to this record in so long. And I remember it being like sort of a, it might've been actually past it. It might've been Live Journal, but I sort of thought of it as like a record where it's got a lot of good stuff for your aim away message, kind of thing. And so I was like a little worried that it was going to be like real embarrassing. But I thought for the most part it wasn't. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like there's a couple times I think that it gets a little, you're like, okay. But I can't. I'd like honestly
like forced into a one-liner or something.
Yeah, he gets really on the nose when a lot of times when he kind of deals with like God and stuff. Mm-hmm. And
like
those
Bukowski,
days, right? Like if God takes life, he's an Indian giver. Like
because I remember like being exactly. I remember being like young and like really liking the song Bukowski, because I was like edgy,
for
God,
sure,
kind of person. And in fact, at that point, I had never heard of Bukowski, and then I read him because of this, and I'm still a fan and stuff. But like I just that was like a deep song to me then, and now that song is sort of like I think a lesser kind of track on here lyrically at least. I mean, it's a good song
highlight for a lot of people.
I'm saying like the lyrics are sort of like like Darren said, that if God takes life, he's an Indian giver. Like that's something that's real deep when you're 14.
Yeah, there's some of that, but I was actually like, I was expecting it to be cringy, but then I was sort of pleasantly surprised reading along earlier this week because, when I was in high school, what I took away from the song is that he decides, that there's no God or something like that. Whereas reading it now, it's like there's a little bit more to it where he's kind of like, do I want to live like a totally nihilist life? Like, who would want to live like that? Who would want to be such an asshole and like have such a poor outlook on things? Like, I'll be alienated from other people who know how to enjoy things and stuff like that. I feel like he starts to like almost get angry, and I like how he does that like layered voice thing where one's like kind of deep and devilish. It's almost like he's making himself angry thinking about it. I mean, I thought there was just like a little more to it than my 14-year-old mind knew, and I think that's true of a lot of the songs. I think like Float On is actually quite like more poignant than I even realized. Just the idea of just like saying like everything's going to be okay, but in the way he says it, like we'll all float on, is I don't know, it's like a little like moving for some reason, especially the way it mellows out on the chorus. So let's talk about those songs, and I want to obviously get to Float On specifically a little bit, but the dance pop type songs, I think about Float On. Ocean Breathe Salty is a little mellower, but it was a single. It was more of an alternative single. I saw the video on Fuse a lot.
Yeah, I forgot about Fuse. Yeah.
I used to just have it on in the background. Like,
that was the only one to watch. Couldn't watch MTV. Couldn't watch VH1. So, there's like The View is extremely got that like dance disco thing, and One Chance does it at least in the verses, I think. And it's weird listening now because I thought of it as kind of like a unique, cool sound, but it does sound very much of its place in time. And it's interesting because it doesn't sound any different than, do you remember Franz Ferdinand? Like the Take Me Out song?
I always got that song confused with Float On, like when I was young, like because they both came out around the same time. Right. And I would hear like Franz Ferdinand and I'd be like, oh, is this Float On or is it that fucking Franz Ferdinand song? Because I never liked them. Like I remember like I downloaded the record because I thought it might be like this, and then it was just trash. And I would always get fucking tricked by that song.
But it's weird, right? That like those songs they're
almost a dime a dozen, like in that time.
Yeah, they are completely like, I mean, that became so popular at the time, like with the Rapture and Arctic Monkeys did a lot. That just was so popular at the time. Like, how do you feel about those songs and that style?
I feel like I look at Float On like as sort of better than all those, and I don't know if it actually is or if it's just like still like the 16-year-old fanboy, Modest Mouse fanboy is like, oh no, yeah, but that one's like way above those. But I mean, I listened to Float On and I was like, yeah, fuck, that song is a banger. And I think if I listen to that Franz Ferdinand song today or MGMT or something, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I remember, that time period, it was fine.
Okay.
But again, I can't tell if it's like just clouded judgment.
Yeah, I mean, I think Float On is an excellent song. I thought about it then, and I still think it's a good song. I, can't really find much to gripe about with it. A dance song like Dance Hall, we kind of already talked about a bit, but I don't know. I've never really been a huge fan, even back in the day, of songs like this. It was just never, I don't know, it was never the kind of vibe that I went to Modest Mouse for. You know what I mean? Moody, teenage Darren was just not looking to dance and jump around.
That's true. I mean? That's true.
So I kind of always, these were sort of like the least listened to songs on the record, I would say, aside from Float On.
Yeah, they're the ones that I think are just like least interesting now because they just sound so much of their era. And, of course, these are the songs that made this hit. another thing I wanted to mention that once I thought of it, I like couldn't shake it. And I wonder if you agree, or will agree. They do this thing a lot in this album where they make these dancey, funky songs like very elegant and grand. I think the arrangements sound like quite lush, and the way they accomplish this a lot of the time is sort of, like the high notes on a guitar with like a lot of delays and stuff like that on them, and I basically realized that it's the Coldplay trick. Like this is Coldplay's entire career is like big, swelling, anthemic, hooks with just high guitars, like kind of, like copying The Edge from U2 and stuff. And it just made me realize that like, maybe I thought this was kind of cool and unique and indie sounding, but it's not that different from even Coldplay at this time.
Yeah, I can't really agree or disagree. I honestly only know like the Coldplay songs that are on the radio. I don't know Coldplay well enough.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know Coldplay well enough either, but like can you sort of explain like why you think, kind of explain it again, I guess?
I guess I just feel that some of these songs are
like, which ones, I guess?
I mean, I think of like the beginning of One Chance in particular, but also, like Ocean Breathe Salty, like the way those, like when it kind of builds up, and there's like,
I do agree on that one. Yeah.
There's a lot of that where it's like, that's the way they make it anthemic. And what you want to do when you want to move into bigger venues and you want to be on the radio and stuff, you make anthems. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these songs have that like anthemic, hold up your lighter kind of quality. Sure. And they accomplish it the exact same way that Coldplay does. And, I just think that there's an interesting thing happening here, which is that at this period, indie is kind of reaching critical mass. It's about to like enter the mainstream. And you've got artists like Coldplay that, I don't know if you guys remember, but they were like considered by some people kind of cool and indie, even though they're very popular. They're like, oh, why aren't other mainstream acts as creative and cool as Coldplay? Now we all know that Coldplay sucks, but
what kind of music do you listen to, man? Oh, indie, Coldplay, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if there's any good reason to think of like Float On as different from, The Scientist or Clocks or whatever the big Coldplay song was.
The Scientist
that same
is actually
year.
That's a good song. You remember the video, the walking backwards?
I do. I definitely do.
No, I actually agree. I mean, I agree. Like, and I think as a Modest Mouse fan, you would struggle with this because obviously deep down you love those previous records, but like this is really a sign of like kind of changing into a direction to become more mainstream. Like it's unfortunate because you're sort of saying like indie was right on the doorstep of becoming mainstream, but like what got them through the doorstep was like basically adhering to, similarities of what was already mainstream. You know what I mean? It's not like the moon in Antarctica became mainstream. Yes, like there was like a shift,
Yeah, big concessions, I think.
Yes.
And I do kind of want to, we'll return to that obviously when we get to the selling out stuff. Before that though, do you have any kind of other songs you want to single out? Anything like you really hate or dislike on this album?
There's nothing I like hate, but I will say that I think the last little bit drags from Blame It on the Tetons to The Good Times Are Killing Me. I think it drags a little bit. We've got four, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, but like we kind of got four of these like mostly mellowish tracks back to back to back. I think they're all fairly good on their own, but it's just sort of bad sequencing. I think
honestly though, I jotted it down and like Black Cadillacs is kind of trying to be a little bit of a stomper, but it for some reason
it just
like,
doesn't
really fails.
And that's why I said like sort of like for sort of, because that one like kind of like you can see it like edging towards it, but I don't think it reaches it. I think One Chance is a little. It's probably my least favorite on the record, and
yeah, I might agree.
Like if I had to delete one, I think that would be the easy choice here. Like Good Times Are Killing Me, I think is like a good outro, kind of song.
I think it's almost a masterpiece.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say like I don't know why we haven't talked about this song yet, but like this song is like amazing. Like,
did you know it's like
it's one of the reasons why I stick around for the whole album.
Yeah,
I want to get to this
right.
Did you know like the Flaming Lips play on that song?
Yeah.
I didn't know that until this week, like reading about it. But yeah, no, that's a good song. But I think like the three, sort of mellow things right before it, or four if you count the that minute interlude thing, like sort of like steal the impact from it. Just a touch. Bit. Like I'd get rid of One Chance. I'd maybe get rid of Black Cadillacs. If not, I'd move it up. And I'd probably blame it on the Tetons somewhere else too.
Yeah, that's not a bad claim. But I was gonna single out "Good Times Are Killing Me," which I think is just awesome, and it's weird because it kind of reminds me of the Moon in Antarctica in the sense of. Yes. It's like the first song on the album that actually is doing some creative things with production and arrangement where, it goes into, it kind of cutely starts with like a, like a lo-fi kind of throwback where they're just like singing and they go all off key and stuff. And then it just like illustrates the polish of this album when they do this group sing thing. And then the next line is like the polished, finished version, and it's like so clean and so like in your face. Yeah. But then, amazingly, by the end of the song, these like lush strings have come in, and yet the song starts to sort of descend back into lo-fi territory, where it just becomes like unmixed, like sort of group vocals, like a bunch of people standing in front of a microphone. The drums get like increasingly compressed as the track gets on, to where they're kind of like, by the end of the song, like in a weird way. There's like strange parts where there's just these like kind of little looping synthy sounds, like bendy synth keyboard sounds, like, and just acoustic guitar and stuff. You know what I mean? Like this is kind of a very inventive song.
Yeah.
The way that you get a lot of that on Moon in Antarctica.
Right. Well, and what you're describing is like nothing else on the rest of the record, because every song on this record seems to have a very clear like bookend. Like it's got a beginning and an end, and like exactly where you're going. All right, here's the chorus, here's the bridge. This song, like so much of the Moon in Antarctica, you get lost in. Like you lose track of how many times they've said "the good times are killing me." You know what I mean? And you're just
right.
diving into the music and letting it sort of just swell around you, and you have no idea when the song's going to end. And that's some of the stuff that I feel like the Moon in Antarctica achieves, like you had mentioned before, where there aren't just like the simple structured songs where where you're heading and you can predict the ending and everything. And that's missing from the rest of this album. That's why I love this song so much.
Yeah, well, maybe it would shine for Dan a little bit more if it didn't follow that kind of slow little
which is, I think
there.
It's fair. I think it's fair.
Yeah. So, before we move on to like sort of bigger topics, what are your thoughts on the album as a whole now in 2020? Like, did your feelings change? How did it go overall, revisiting?
Can we give it a rating too?
I guess so.
Sure,
I'll have to come up with one on the fly.
Yeah, I'll come up with one.
I am too. Me too.
But speak your piece first.
Yeah, I think like obviously I didn't enjoy it as much as I did, back in the day. At that point, like you said, Gabe, Modest Mouse at some point was probably my favorite band. But I sort of was like, is this going to be like real not fun to listen to? Is it just going to be? But I sort of enjoyed it, like so much so that I went back to the rest of the discography before this record and like listened to it multiple times. I sort of got stuck listening to Moon in Antarctica a ton, and had to keep being like, oh yeah, we're reviewing Good News. I gotta get back to Good News and stuff. So like I did sort of like enjoy it. It was kind of like.
But did you feel like having done that it made this album feel weaker, since you were dabbling in some of the classic-ier classics?
No, I feel like I felt the same. Like I said, I came to Modest Mouse like through this record, but I always sort of enjoyed. Once I got into the whole discography of the band, I always enjoyed those other records a little bit more than I enjoyed this one. And so it sort of felt exactly the same. Am I gonna like continue? Like, is Modest Mouse back in the rotation? We're back to it. Probably not. It sort of like felt like you saw like somebody who was a good friend in like high school that you lost touch with. You go out, you have,
and you're like, yeah, that was nice, but never again.
Yeah, it's like I'm not gonna like
not gonna end up in any
hang
of your
out all the
playlists
time.
or anything, is that-
I'm not gonna but yeah, exactly. It was nice to see him again. Maybe I'll see him in 5 more years or 10 more years,
another 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like it. I mean, there's a reason. Like we haven't gotten into the later things, but like I owned this record on vinyl and I still own it. I owned We Were Dead and I no longer own that one. It's like this is like sort of something like, like I said, I feel like I felt like how I imagine older people feel when they hear something from their high school that they probably haven't heard in a while, and it's like, if somebody like that hadn't listened to the Rolling Stones in 20 years and they heard it, they'd probably be like, oh yeah, I love that, and I would say like, yeah, I love Mouse Mouth. Like if someone asked me to, before I re-listened to all this, I would still say I enjoyed them quite a bit. I mean, the last time I saw them live was like 5 or 6 years ago or something, so like I was still enough to venture out for them,
Yeah. What about you, Darren?
Yeah, so I guess I didn't really say this at the top, but I don't really listen to Modest Mouse anymore, specifically this record,
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's really something that didn't exactly grow up with me, I guess I would say, and maybe later on we'll kind of talk about other bands even during that same era, or at least that I was listening to at the era, that did kind of grow up and draw differences between the two. But, coming back to it, it was definitely very like nostalgic, you know what I mean? A lot of moments on the album that just kind of brought back memories that I had never even really thought about, you know what I mean? It was just very strange, kind of looking at it from that point of view. And then, like I had mentioned, like thinking all the way, like it's so vivid, the memories that this song seems, or Float On in particular, seemed to bring about when thinking about that time and that era. But, I definitely enjoyed listening to the record. I didn't hate it. Kind of similar to you, Dan, I started to spend too much time with the Moon in Antarctica and had to like force myself to come back to this and focus. But yeah, it helped sort of frame my feelings and thoughts about this record and everything that we've been discussing regarding, just how it feels like it's so calculated and, structured and, it's just so different from the album before. And, we did talk about like some of the slower songs, and I feel like there are some really gorgeous moments on there. Why are they gorgeous? Because I'm thinking of like the Moon in Antarctica. I'm thinking of the things that I really love from the other records. You know what I mean? So in terms of like giving it a score, I guess if I were to think about it that way, I don't know. I'm probably somewhere around like maybe like a 6.5, 7 kind of range.
Ooh, wow.
It's not like I would never want to listen to it again. It's not like that, if it was a friend like Dan had described, maybe I'd hang out with them again in a year. I give it like a year,
A new rating system here.
I forgot to give my score. I'd give it like an 8.6, I think.
Okay.
Wow. This is some differing. You're verging into like must-hear territory, and Darren's like kind of well out of that.
No, I think if you've never heard this,
Darren's in fun to nostalgia.
7 is yeah. I mean, 7's like you could listen to it if you're a fan of Modest Mouse.
I think if you've never heard this record before, you definitely should. I think Modest Mouse as a whole, you definitely required listening.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was always like a big defender of this album. I was very aware, in discussions online that it was, we're going to turn to this now, looked down upon a little bit by like the hardcore Modest Mouse fans who saw it as sort of like selling out, sounding more commercial, et cetera, et cetera. And I was always like kind of the person who like had to comment like, no. You got to give it a chance because it's just as brilliant, just as brilliant as Moon in Antarctica, Lonesome Crowded West, et cetera, et cetera. And
I don't going to
f-
back that up here, Gabe?
No, I don't feel that way anymore. Honestly, before this week, I would have probably said the same thing, but it was like I got a chance, like you guys, to listen to basically all their records a little bit. And, in comparison, I was like, this is definitely just a little bit more ordinary. The Coldplay-ness, the Franz Ferdinand-ness just sort of dates it. Whereas I think that, their other albums are like singular accomplishments. But at the end of the day, it's like the songwriting is still very, very strong on basically every track here. And I think I would give it something like an 8 out of 10. Kind of like your solid 4-star type of record, kind of just right in between the two of you. But now I want to talk about Selling Out. Now, we touched on this, but did you guys have any, maybe as you became like bigger Modest Mouse fans, did you have any problem with the success of Float On? Did you feel like, oh, why are these like fucking cheerleaders talking about Float On, or like, did you have any of that back then? Did you see the band as selling out in any way?
I like couldn't, because I heard them from Float On, so if I bitched
that never
about
stopped me, honestly.
Yeah. And I'm sure, if you found my old live journal or something, I might have, but I honestly do not remember ever bitching about it. Because I came to them from this. I was pretty young when Moon and Art, it just, if it didn't hit the radio or fuse, I just kind of wouldn't know about it. So yeah, I never really had like that problem, because I sort of wasn't able to.
Yeah, similar to that. I wasn't a fan at the time, so I had no reason to be angry. And I listened to the record. I was one of those kids, mainstream kids, like, oh, let me check this out. This is kind of cool. You know what I mean? I'm hip now too, right?
Yeah.
But never going too far to be like, this is, Float On's amazing, right? Because like there's too many people that like that song. You can't beat that. You can't join that crowd, right? And so, I had no real thoughts about like the Selling Out thing. Now though, like looking at it from this perspective, I can kind of see why people would accuse them of like sort of selling out, and then like the record after that really sort of solidifies it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And we'll get into that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about their whole career a little bit later on. I had no problem. I mentioned I was a big defender of this, and I always admired bands that I viewed as sort of reaching like, wide audiences without compromising their sound, which I viewed this as. I'm not sure I still do, but I'll have more to say about that. I do kind of remember, like, I can't remember when I saw Modest Mouse. Johnny Marr was there, so it must have been like 2007 or 2008.
Yeah.
Was I there?
You went to the Hard Rock show?
Yeah, it was at Hard Rock, right?
Yeah, you were there?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember like I basically shouted for, like, requested Float On, and it was meant as a joke, and the people around me laughed because they understood it as a joke that I would request such a shitty song, like requesting Creep at a Radiohead concert or something like that. Yeah. And so I really distinctly remember like that was the opinion of the song, and I played into it, but deep in my heart I felt like it was a great song, and that nobody should make fun of it. But do you guys find it like weird that because I guess I could come up with some justification, but like, why was there this reaction to Float On and this album when they signed to a major label for Moon and Antarctica? And, one of the tracks from that album, Gravity Rides Everything, was in a Nissan commercial, which they took a little heat for, but sort of just said, like, he has some funny quote about like, I love when people who are like, living with their parents or flipping burgers for some asshole tell me, how I should make a living or whatever, but
did that happen when that album came out? Or I thought that was like after Antarctica.
I guess I don't know the date, but I believe that it's just clear, right, that they were taking deliberate steps to reach some kind of bigger audience and make some kind of mainstream success story before this album. This is just the one where it worked. So, why was this such a shock? Why was it such a scandal to people?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't know.
Stumped.
I mean, if I was really into like Modest Mouse before this record came out, I could totally understand why, like, everything that you love about a band like that, is everything that the mainstream does not. Like it's not what the mainstream is looking for. You know what I mean? And there is something to the feeling of like having something so close to you that no one else is in the know on, right? Or maybe just you and your close friends, right?
Mm-hmm. Right?
And now the secret gets out, and you've got your cheerleaders and your jocks and all the people who are listening to 93 pop radio, top 40 radio. Right?
Right.
I'm over here naming an actual
local
radio station. Sorry. Yeah. But like top 40 radio are now like tapping into this, and they don't know the moon in Antarctica. They don't know the lonesome crowded West. And so it's like there's a sense of like, I can understand why somebody would feel like offended, because it's like, you don't even get it. You don't get Modest Mouse.
It's like someone got into your little secret club.
Yeah. So I can sympathize with that, I feel like, you know?
Yeah, and I feel like Moon in Antarctica maintains the kind of like intimacy that their music had, which made it feel like a special discovery, you know, unique to you. And like we were kind of mentioning, I think my explanation of the reason why they were only accused of trying to sell out when this happened is that, you know, one, it worked, but two, that Moon in Antarctica is like completely uncompromising. I really think like there is no real attempt at a single,
right? Like
at all. I mean, there's some like very catchy songs, but they're all strange. I mean, it's a concept album, for fuck's sake. Like, that's not how you make a hit record, you know, unless you're Pink Floyd, basically. And it's like, you know what I mean? It just feels like when we get to Good News for People Who Love Bad News, I think people sensed that there was a simplification of the sound, an extra polish on the sound, and song structures that were very verse, chorus, verse, and, you know, kind of aimed at the radio. Do you think it's as simple as that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like this song, I mean, Flowed On, and I think other parts of this record, like, definitely are aimed at, I don't know, success or, you know, airplay or something, whereas the things before just seemed like the songs they wanted to do the way they wanted to do them.
Yeah, it's like they just signed to a major label because they wanted more people to hear them, but they didn't stop like experimenting and pushing themselves.
Exactly, yeah.
So, you know, back when we were young, I want to talk about just this idea of selling out a little bit. You know, what did selling out mean to you back then?
You know, I was a Tool fan before I was a Modest Mouse fan, and you know, Tool has that song "Hooker with a Penis," I believe,
right.
About like selling out and how like that's a stupid concept. So I always, you know, I was gonna take Tool's side on pretty much anything. So,
oh, really?
You know, so I always like kind of thought that was a silly concept solely because Tool told me, but. Also, I'm sure I would bitch, you know, if I saw somebody with a Nirvana shirt on, I'd be like, ugh, but they don't even know Bleach, the best Nirvana out. Not much has changed in 15 years or whatever. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it always sort of seemed like just like kind of what Darren was talking about earlier, and it just like. It was like somebody getting into your little club when it was a band that, you know, only you and your friends knew, or, you know, you had only seen on the internet or something. And then now, you know, the baseball player next to you is listening to it. It does sort of feel like a little bit of a, you know.
But there's no like valid, I mean, because you're describing like, that's a personal thing of, you know, for the listener.
I think it is.
But like,
I think it just
there's
is
no
a
actual
thing.
selling out.
Well, I mean, no, I think there is actual selling out like that.
Sure.
Like, you know, I mean, when somebody, I'm trying to think of like a good example, but, you know, when somebody's making Pepsi commercials or something and they, you know, before were legitimate artists or something, like, I think that is selling out. Or if you're like, you know, doing something for a bank or, you know, there's like certain sort of like, things that are the limit. But I think like letting a car commercial use it, you know, whatever, like, you know, they need money, you know. I mean, Bob Dylan's been in a car commercial, so I'll allow it.
Well, and how often does a song that ends up on a car commercial become a smash hit or like change the course of a band's career? It's usually like it's a song like Float On that like really, takes off and becomes.
Yeah, it's like the car commercial used it for.
Well, you hear like the song.
That
song Maps. I think it was a really popular song. It was used in commercials and stuff. But like, I don't think that was. It was the song that was kind of more popular, and then it just got also added to a commercial. Or like Architecture in Helsinki. They're in like one of those Sprint commercials, I think it was. And it's not like they suddenly exploded or became suddenly popular.
Of Montreal, like physically, like as a band, are in like I think it's like a T-Mobile or Sprint or so. There's some cell phone commercial, like they themselves. It's like they're hanging out backstage. Yeah. And stuff,
well, I was going to mention, it actually did make me a little queasy back at that time. The idea of Montreal selling that one song to Outback Steakhouse, to the point where it was like re-recorded to be like, let's get Outback tonight, and I'm like, oh my God, like it really hurts me. But I think for me, it was always like, I guess it gave me some pause sometimes, that kind of like commercializing your art in a literal sense. But when I thought of somebody as like compromising to achieve success, that was something that I really couldn't stand, right? And I think that's what people were accusing Modest Mouse of doing.
But can I add something here? So like, I totally agree, and I feel like, yes, Moon Antarctica was on a major label, but then they came in and like, great album, guys, but if you ever want to break into the top 40, if you want to win a Grammy, here's what you're going to need to do. You're going to have to make some make adjustments, whatever. Look at a band like Radiohead, you know what I mean, where you have Pablo Honey, you have the Bends, and you can see their trajectory where it could have gone. It's like that's the era where there was a split. Either they continue down this road, they like polish up the Bends, make more top 40 type of like sound out of that, or they take it in whatever direction they want with like OK Computer, even further, even deeper with Kid A, and further and further. Whereas I think Modest Mouse was starting on that with like the Moon Antarctica, and then shifted into
reeling it back. Yes.
But is the Radiohead, because that is a good like analogy you're saying, but is it not the same thing, because they start out with the hit, like nobody knew Radiohead. I guess
it's a little bit
Creep,
unique, but I feel like Radiohead I always admired, and I admired like Nirvana for the same reason, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, whatever, like because they succeeded on their own terms. It was like the double whammy of Radiohead making OK Computer and it being like a massive hit, I thought was just so admirable and cool. And I was thinking about this week, and like another thing I think was really important to me, and this is like really a 90s thing kind of, is like you could basically get away with signing to a major label and all that stuff as long as you were like going to use them to do your own thing and succeed on your own terms. And it was even better if you had some kind of like antagonistic relationship with your label. You know what I mean? Like that was the best. Like when, you just sense that like Nirvana would sing about hating their label, and you just like to imagine, their faces, the faces of those like suits, and, even though they were probably like totally fine with it and didn't give a shit because it was selling millions of copies, but like,
totally
like this was just a huge part of like the brand, and it was almost necessary for rock musicians in the 90s to like be seen as hating their label. Like Trent Reznor hates their label, like they're constantly fighting, and
it's like getting on the, like it makes them almost like heroes. Like they got on the inside, they're fighting from within, kind of thing.
The Rolling Stone cover with Kurt wearing that like corporate magazine still suck shirt.
Yeah, exactly. But you're still on Rolling Stone. Yeah, exactly. Yes, You're still using them for your, exactly.
Yeah, it was like a way to have it both ways, but you could still seem punk while reaching the masses. And that was very cool. But, think about it now. It is a little bit of like a branding thing. I can almost imagine that there were some bands that were like, can we get like leak a story that we're fighting with our label so that people think we're cool,
For sure.
And so it becomes a little bit maybe lame and like contrived in retrospect. And I think that this is where people, this new wave of like questioning the idea of selling out, it basically doesn't exist anymore. But I think this is where it kind of started when like, people started to think about earlier times when like artists, basically all the artists we know from the 60s and 70s and stuff. I mean, these big artists, they were just mainstream acts. They were all signed to major labels. They did holiday specials and shit like that, and it wasn't a big deal. Then there was like this sort of brief period where, if Modest Mouse had released a Christmas album, I would have never listened to them again. And now you can release a Christmas album again, and it's perfectly fine. I mean, why do you think this change has happened?
I think it's because now, like, I think almost everybody understands that, like, nobody buys records. They like good news for people who love bad news. It went platinum. Like, this sold it sold 1.5 million copies. Like, the one record last year, 2019, sold over 1 million copies, and it was Taylor Swift, arguably like the most famous artist right now, like, whereas at the same time, she would have sold 15, 20 million copies or something. So I think like people understand that, like, now you sort of, just like to be a band that makes their living, like, you sort of like have to find other ways, be that, I mean, if a Christmas album gets you some more plays, I still kind of would have a problem with a good band releasing a Christmas record. But, like, now if I heard, Modest Mouse in a car commercial or something, I'd be like, gotta make your cash somewhere, or of Montreal Outback, I think is still sort of a bad thing. Letting it being re-recorded, that's sort of a whole different argument. But, just lending a song to something now, in a movie or anything. Like, I mean, there was a time that, like, if you were in a big Hollywood movie, not an indie flick or something like that, would even be something. Whereas, like, now, I feel like people just have come to the realization that, like, that's the only way to make money. And I'm sure there's still people who do bitch about it. I think it's not as vocal anymore.
Well, and I think that, like, even the argument that you just made about indie films and, a major film, the line between the two is so blurred. It's like almost to the point where it's almost difficult to tell, the difference, the clear difference. I mean, obviously, if you've got like major blockbusters, you can tell where the money's at.
Yeah.
But I mean, honestly, some films that are considered indie films look just as good. I mean, they're filmed probably using very similar equipment. You know what I mean? Like that. It's just so similar. Right. So then moving to the music piece, like, I just feel like the playing field has like leveled out in such a extraordinary way with like the digital era, right? I mean, the access that people have to, equipment to be able to record music and make sounds that are very similar to like what you hear like on the radio just makes the idea of like selling out or having this polished sound and everything just less of an impact. I don't know, like, it just doesn't. And then also I think the access to it, because like part of the selling out thing, I feel like, especially if we're looking at Modest Mouse, is like people loved Float On, but did they go out and like buy the entire record and actually check out the record? Probably not. That was just kind of the assumption. But I feel like now, I'm not, and maybe it's just old age or whatever, but like, the ability to be able to just hop on Spotify and like check out a record or check out multiple songs, rather than just loving one particular song. It's just so different now. You understand what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't think that... Well,
it's just so easy.
And getting your song... So, like, you can get your song on Spotify right next to Modest Mouse, right next to Radiohead and all these other big bands. Exactly. And it's no longer like... It's this unachievable thing that, like, oh, the only way for people to hear you is you got to get signed to a big label and you got to record an amazing record in Nashville. You know what I mean? Like, that's...
No, exactly. I mean...
It's gone.
In 2004, to have your album be in Best Buy, which is where, I'm sure most, teenagers in America, that lived in, not a big city, got their albums from, you had to be on a big label, like...
For sure. And your t-shirt, and band shirts, you guys even remember, like, before Hot Topic, like, you couldn't find a band shirt.
I used to,
Walmart,
I used to get
Target.
this magazine. I can't remember what it was, but it was half a phone book or something, and it was just band shirts. You had your Led Zeppelin set, and you had to like physically like fill out an order form and send it away. Whereas now that was crazy by 2004.
You've got baby
No, exactly.
onesies of like the Beatles, of Nirvana, the little smiley face. I mean, it's everywhere.
No, exactly. I mean, Target sells all. I have a John Coltrane shirt I bought at Target. It's like it's crazy.
So is that selling out, or
But let me ask you. I mean, the things you're saying, like the playing field has been leveled. Anybody can make it. It's like, does that maybe make selling out less justifiable in a weird way? Like, you don't need a major label to reach the masses anymore.
But I don't think anybody really looks at going on a major label as selling out anymore, because honestly, like, what is the point of going on a major label? You could have your own song, put it on Spotify, like Darren said. It's just as accessible as looking up radio. I mean, me and you both have music on there. You can search it the same way you can find this record. And
sellouts. Jeez.
Yeah, no, exactly. But that's the thing. Like I made up some stupid record label name and I put it on there, and it cost me $10 or something.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, it's just like, it just like sort of raises, like, in a counterintuitive way, it raises like strange questions about like, why are people still making like trash? Like, I thought of it because like Casey Musgraves released a Christmas album, right? And Pitchfork like wanted to pretend like, oh, she's like deeper and smarter, and more interesting and creative than like your normal country pop artist. We didn't think so when we reviewed that album, but then she releases a Christmas album, and it's like, I'm old enough to remember when that kind of, would deflate that whole idea that she's like anything different. And it's almost like she didn't need to release a Christmas album for any other reason than to make some cash. And that's literally the only motivating factor there. And like, when I was younger, that was considered selling out and generally considered a bad thing. So, I just wonder if, we need to lose that. And, people do seem more sympathetic to like people just needing to make a living or something like that. But, I just think about like, like somebody like Lizzo, right? Like her music, which in itself is a little bit like already manufactured pop, but she sells her music, or at least her label does. Maybe she has to give it an okay to like Apple commercials, which is like kind of objectively an evil company, right? So nobody scolds her, one, for selling her music to commercials, because that nobody does that anymore. But two, nobody even scolds her for selling it to like using it to promote evil.
Well, I think that's a bad example, because like you said, her music's already sort of like manufactured and commercialized. So it's exactly sort of when we were younger would be on Apple's commercial.
When we were younger, we would say Lizzo is not an artist. Like, she is just a commercial, like a pop commercial, whatever, product.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah, I get what you're saying. Like Pitchfork and stuff gives it play.
They want to say, no, she's an artist as valuable as anybody else, even though she just basically like sells Apple products.
I think that, maybe that is just a product of poptimism. And just, is a byproduct of that. Like Pitchfork wouldn't have even listened to, whatever the Lizzo of 2004 was, like that wouldn't even make the page at all. Whereas like now, they review it. Not only do they, because they would do that every now and then just to like really joke on something, like give it a 2 and say how shitty it is or something. Now they not only review it, I don't remember what they gave that record, but it was like a decent score. They like look at it seriously and stuff. I think that is more of a poptimism sort of ailment.
Yeah. And poptimism, I mean, a big part of it was like questioning the, frames through which we looked at art. And one of those frames was like this kind of authenticity thing that they, the poptimists declared bullshit, because, it was mostly a way to just sort of favor like white rock kids, and stuff like that. And there were whole genres like pop and hip hop and stuff that had no like qualms with, selling out, quote unquote. It just wasn't even like a question for them. So if you wanted to celebrate that kind of music, you kind of had to abandon that. I just wonder every day if it's like worth, giving up. So do you guys think it's a good thing that we've abandon this idea of selling out completely?
I sort of alluded to earlier, I don't think we have or should completely abandon it. Like I said, I think it's fine, you know, if somebody's in a movie now, or, you know, a commercial for something that's fairly benign or something. But yeah, I mean, if you're out there flogging a product that's, you know, objectively like bad or something, like I said, you know, you're giving your music to a there was something I was bitching about the other day. We were watching TV. Somebody had it was a Chase commercial. Oh, it was Taylor Swift, like the new Taylor Swift thing. Like, you know, just fucking, not only is her song in it, like she's in
right.
it, you know, like there's several commercials she's doing for Chase. I ordered some Amazon stuff, and like the box was the new Taylor Swift record, you know, colored and everything. Yeah. Like that is too much, especially. I mean, she's doesn't need the Chase money, right, the Capital One, whatever it was, you know, credit card money.
Trying to make a living.
Yeah, exactly. Like
trying to eke out a meager living.
Yeah, just a meager millionaire's living. But you know, I'm like if Float On was in the new Capital One commercial, I would say, you know, bit too far. But you know, if it's in the new, I mean, even if it was in whatever next Avengers movie or something, fine. You know, I wouldn't say anything about it.
Yeah. What do you think, Darren? Have we lost something giving up the idea of selling out?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I don't even think I necessarily agree. Like, if I heard Float On in like a Capital One commercial or whatever, I don't think I would find that like real offensive. I don't know. I feel like music has become, you know, so much more like of a communal type of thing in this digital era, and that it's just, you know, being on a commercial is just one other way to like be heard. And it feels a whole lot less of like, you know, man, this band's like really desperately trying to get somewhere, so they're just going to sell the rights to their song. Cause like people are paying enough attention where, you know, you must be really desperate if you're like selling, you know, if I don't know, like, I can't really think of a particular band, but if, you know, a band with a real meaningful stance on politically or whatever it is just went and like gave their song to like Donald Trump's campaign or something like that just because they wanted money or something, you know, like that stuff I just don't think is like really going to happen, because people care too much, and like it's too easy for people to, you know, find out about these things. And like, okay, I was just happening to Google about that Nissan commercial that you mentioned, and there's some threads from like 2003 when it like came out, but dude, could you imagine like what that would be like now, like with Reddit and like all the other, you know, bands have to be very careful, and I think they are fairly careful about like not doing something that's just going to totally destroy their image. You know what I mean? Do you not like agree with that in this era?
Well, I mean, I guess so. It just feels like it's like hard to destroy your image now, you know, in a financial way. And, you know, I guess like my last point would just be that I think that there should be, like, we shouldn't give up the idea of selling out, you know, completely. And that like we should go back to having two categories where there's like art and there's commercial products. And like, that doesn't mean that like art is never on a major label or whatever. There's never artistic, like major blockbuster films or whatever, but it's just like one thing is like for artistic purposes and the other is to sell a product. And, you know, if we could get that back, but then like subtract the racism and the sexism that used to be part of like the rockist culture, you know, wouldn't that be the perfect compromise? Because I think about stuff like, I don't know, Frank Ocean or like Tyler the Creator or Jay-Z or Beyonce or something, like, you know, major label artists who you could not say are selling out in any way. They're like that classic model of just using a major platform to do what they want to do. And maybe not everybody has that opportunity. And I guess that's also a good point. But I don't know. I feel like some things are just commercial products and we should stop trying to pretend like they're art. But again, that's Poptimism's fault. But to begin wrapping up, you know, final verdict. Do you think Modest Mouse sold out after all? You talked about it, Darren, how you do think that they simplified their sound. Maybe even an external hand simplified their sound. Looking at this album now, do you have a problem with that, with them trying to reach the masses in that way?
I mean, I do, right? Because I love like the Moon and Antarctica so much, and I feel like the better direction for them to have gone would just to have, you know, explored that sound, that experimental style further. I mean, you listed like the Beatles. We've kind of already talked about like Radiohead. I mean, you could go back to like, I don't know, like somebody like Beethoven or something. Like as their career, as their music, you know, continued, it seemed to always push boundaries, you know, try to push the sound into whatever the next era was going to be, or just doing whatever like they really wanted to do. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
And I feel like Modest Mouse did the opposite, where they were like, we're not going to write a concept record or like really, you know, kind of write poetry and explore, you know, just, you know, the inner human struggle or whatever. Like, we're just not going to do that. We're going to simplify all of that and try to package like a hit record. And then the record that follows that is them doing that successfully. Because I mean, it was, you know, they had a couple of smash hits off of that as well. And, you know, that they just, and when they do that, it feels, as a fan, I'm like, man, so like, did you not, like, what happened to how you felt on the Moon and Antarctica? Like, do you not feel that way anymore? You know, and Weezer, I guess, is kind of arguably a similar band that like made a decision that we don't want to go in that direction anymore. And for better or for worse, you know, that's kind of how all that panned out.
Well,
but like,
for worse.
Yeah. Well, certainly for worse, but I mean, there's some good like post.
Well,
if you want to know, check out our list. We got an episode on that.
Yeah,
we covered it.
Episode.
Oh,
yeah, we sure did.
But we wouldn't do that for Modest Mouse. I don't think that would be something we would really entertain. But
yeah.
I mean,
basically, we got a less good album, and actually, we lost our favorite band since they keep doing the same shit over and over again.
Correct.
Because of commercial interests or needs. I mean, what is your final verdict on that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, like Darren alluded to, I mean, We Were Dead is an awful record. I like earlier last year I read like Johnny Marr's autobiography, and in it he talks about his time in Modest Mouse, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna re-listen to that record. Haven't heard it in so long. I couldn't even make it through the whole thing. It's like legitimately just bad, you know. I mean, like Dashboard was the hit, and it's not an awful song, but it does sort of feel like a you know, just an attempt at another Float On or something, you know. And then Strangers to Ourselves, the record after that is god fucking awful. It's really bad. And so much so, like I said, you know, I've seen Mouse Mouse in concert a few times. That show you guys talked about, I was at. I looked it up. It was June 24th, 2008. You know, that was the first time I saw him. I saw him a couple times after that. It was always really fun, even though, you know, We Were Dead. I never really like loved that record. Even, you know, those shows were still great. And then I saw them, like, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago. They came to a festival around here. My little sister had never seen them. She wanted to go see them, so I said, oh yeah, I loved Modest Mouse. They're great live. We'll go. And they had just turned into, like, there was 100 people on stage, and you know, it was soulless, and, you know, like, Isaac just seemed like he cared more about like getting through it than you know, anything else. And then you know, they toured with like Brand New, and my wife and my sister went to that show. I didn't even bother, and they both felt the same, you know, like it was just more of that and stuff. And now they came again recently, and it was like $200 for tickets and stuff, and they're selling out, and they're playing at like a medium-sized stadium here, and a place I saw Jay-Z perform at, actually. You know, so like they've just sort of like become like this legacy act that's somehow like bigger than they were at the time, because even, you know, when we saw them in 2008,
it's gonna be like,
was at like a medium-sized venue, you know. And yeah, they
1 year or two they're gonna be doing like Modest Mouse plays Moon in Antarctica in full.
Yep, no, there I would not be shocked, and I'd think about going, I guess.
Yeah, I'd probably go.
Yeah, I probably would. Yeah, you know, I think that, it's interesting because when We Were Dead came out, I listened to it quite a bit, and it's weird because at the time it's hard to tell that like a band has fallen off. I felt that that there were a lot of good songs there and stuff, and but it just like didn't stick with me. I didn't find myself listening to it compulsively at all. And within a few months, I sort of looked back and thought that was really not a very good album. And then it was like by the time their next one came out, I had enough distance to know that I just don't even need to check it out because I listened to the single and I knew all I needed to know. Like they're done. It's just wild how it can fall off like that. But in regard to Good News, do you guys think of it as like their final masterpiece or like the beginning of the end there?
It's a little bit of both. Like I said, I gave it an 8.6. I think it's still a great record, but honestly, I think all the records before this are either 10s or pretty close to it. So it sort of is the last hurrah. It's a little bit of a step back for the things we said. The overproduction at points. I think the track listing isn't the best sequencing and things. So it's sort of the beginning of the downward trend, but it's still at that peak. They've crested the hill, but the downward slide of the pit of strangers to ourselves they're nowhere near that yet, I don't think.
No, I mean, I think it's the beginning of a downward spiral. I there are some songs on here I really do love. I really do like a lot, and but looking at it from like a wider perspective, thinking back in hindsight, again comparing it to the Moon in Antarctica, it's such a step down, you know what I mean? And it's an unfortunate step down that I didn't even realize probably back when it first came out. But looking at it now, it's just like, wow, you can, and obviously seeing the records that came afterwards, it makes it so clear that like, Moon in Antarctica was truly their peak, and they just never ever like it's like they deliberately chose to never venture down that road again. They made a decision, they made a turn, and they never looked back.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I'm sort of on Dan's side in that I think it's a little bit of both, because it does feel like a simplified, more accessible version of Modest Mouse. It's almost like it almost feels Legacy Act-ish when you hear those like little pinch, like bendy pinch harmonics that they would do. Mm-hmm. Because you're like, oh, that's like a cute little reference to old Modest Mouse, and but it really just sounds like sort of a professional rock outfit. It just so happens that like they still had the songwriting chops there, which they sort of quickly lost. And yeah, it's almost bizarre. I want to ask you guys, we didn't prepare for this, but how would you guys rank like the major Modest Mouse albums? Like
just the albums, not the EPs?
You can throw Building Nothing Out of Something in there if you want.
All right. Well, I think I'll start at the bottom then. Strangers to Ourselves, one of the worst records ever made.
I just mean, like, you can skip those ones.
Okay, yeah, all right. So Good News would be the worst of the good ones, I think. Then I'd probably put Lonesome Crowded West, Building Nothing Out of Something, and the top two would be Moon in Antarctica and This Is a Long Drive at number one.
Wow. What about you, Darren?
I think that I think I would do almost the exact same thing, but I think I would switch This Is a Long Drive, and I actually really like Building Nothing Out of Something, but the number one would be the Moon in Antarctica. Kind of, to me, by a long shot. I just always really loved that album. There
was like a long stretch where Lonesome Crowded West was my favorite. But listening this week, actually, I think I like the Moon in Antarctica most. Then I would probably put This Is a Long Drive. Then I might even put Building Nothing Out of Something, and then Lonesome Crowded West, and then Good News. But still kind of a fucking incredible run. And last question. You mentioned this, Dan, and I think we're all on the same page. Why don't we ever revisit Modest Mouse. What is up with that?
I think it's the same reason I don't revisit a lot of stuff that I like was obsessed with at some point. It's just I know it so like well, because like even like I said, I probably hadn't listened to this record in at least 4 or 5 years or something, and I still just like know every word. I kind of like still remember how the music of all the songs go. It's like there just sort of gets to a point with a lot of records that I just know them so well. It's like I can almost just play it in my head. I don't really need to like listen to the record. And it's not really a slight. I mean, there's plenty of records I would say I if you ask me, I would say I love them, but I haven't listened to it in forever because of that reason. And Modest Mouse is that. I mean, basically anything that like at some point, like in high school or something, was my favorite band. That means I. In a pre-Spotify world, it means like I listened to their 4 records, over and over and over and over for months and months, at a time.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really get a chance to talk too much about this, I guess, but I mentioned early on about drawing comparisons between Modest Mouse and maybe some of the other bands that I was listening to in those early high school years that grew up with me, that I took with me out of high school, right? There was, I would say Tool, similar to Modest Mouse, kind of stayed in that area and didn't really grow up with me, right? But like, right. Radiohead certainly did, and Nirvana, I kind of, albums like In Utero, I definitely came back to over the years. And I try to think like, why? Like, what was different about those records and how did I connect with them personally? And I don't know. It's just, and maybe it's like a matter of like discovery, right? Because like when you come back to a record like In Rainbows, which is what, 2007, 3 years after Good News, like I still love that record. I could listen to it right now, you know what I mean? And I would probably just adore it from start to finish. Maybe even discover something I just hadn't even considered. Maybe certain albums like that just they have like a certain density, or they're just adaptable to different phases of your life, whereas Modest Mouse for me personally just kind of sits in this specific time period of my life, and I don't know if it's like the lyrics, the themes. I think it is kind of the themes, honestly, like the things that even the record like The Moon in Antarctica, which I love, I don't necessarily put it on as often as I put on like In Rainbows, you know what I mean? Because you have to sort of be in a certain headspace, I feel like, with The Moon in Antarctica, whereas something like In Rainbows, I could be in a multitude of different emotions or feelings or moments in life, and I don't know, it's kind of, I'm having a hard time explaining it, but what I'm trying to say is it didn't grow with me. Modest Mouse in general just didn't grow with me, whereas other bands that I was listening to at the same time definitely did. And I don't know if it's like a timeless thing or what, but I don't know.
I mean, I guess like beyond even just my personal life, Modest Mouse had the misfortune of being one of the defining bands of their era, in actually 2 ways. One, what we've been talking about today, that they're one of the, Good News is one of the defining albums of the indie crossover point. I think they really kicked the door open for acts like MGMT and Arcade Fire and TV on the radio and stuff to like get popular. But they also, their early work defines like 90s indie rock in a lot of ways, it's like, it's just everything that became, that they really ushered in the era that they then like sort of succumbed to a little bit. Those like kind of dancier songs like on, Lounge, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? On Lonesome Crowded West, it's like there's the dancey disco punk that Franz Ferdinand would eventually, take, and it's too bad that Modest Mouse themselves sound kind of like faded into their era in that point. But even in the 90s, it's like I just have a hard time like separating them from that era to where they don't have like the timeless quality that I think other acts do. And maybe that's just because they were so fucking good at what they did for such a long time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes like in a movie or something, something's really cool, but then it becomes cliche because everyone steals it. And like I feel like Modest Mouse like is sort of that. Like a lot of those bands you mentioned like sort of got their bag of tricks from from Modest Mouse, you know. All right, well, I guess that's enough for this week. So what do you think? We'd love to read your thoughts on the air. You can email us, popshieldpod@gmail.com. Next episode, we think we're going to do Ornette Coleman's Free Jazz versus John Coltrane's Ascension, which should be a ton of fun.
One for the people, and then one for us that nobody actually wants to listen to.
Exactly.
Just taking the complete left turn here.
If you love Modest Mouse, you'll love Ornette Coleman. So if you like the show, help us out by subscribing. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. You can stay connected. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that is @PopShieldPod. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.
So long.